So a tort action is an unreasonable act that causes harm or injury to another. This can also include the omission of an act, which is negligence that causes harm or injury to a person, usually resulting in civil penalties. The first case I used was Sprague versus Gammon. And in this case, Sprague was the plaintiff. She was sprayed with a culture of Salmonella typhimurium during lab. She filed suit against the manufacturer. The manufacturer turned around and filed a third-party suit against the 3 instructors of the community college and against the student who spilled the culture. So the instructors said that they were qualified for indemnity under their school policy. The third-party complaint was upheld because they did not believe that, and they also upheld the third-party complaint against Moore, who was the student that spilled the culture. Sprague was awarded damages for loss of contact with her immunocompromised son, other emotional damages. In my lab, what we would do in this situation is we would cover all our bases. We have the student handbook that the students must sign off on. We make sure that they have all personal protective equipment on and that they use universal precautions, meaning it doesn't matter that the manufacturer said this was a non-pathogenic strain, you would still treat it as though it were, and that's how we operate. And we operate under that so that to cover ourselves. In our student release, we have language that says students understand that they have dangers to their psychological and physical and emotional well-being, including but not limited to accidents and illness. And this would certainly fall under an accident. So I think that this, in the case of my school, would be covered. The next case was Bartell versus Palos Verdes Peninsula School District. And a 12-year-old gained access to the playground and ended up having fatal injuries. So the rule of law says that the district does not have to supervise all persons at all times, because to do so would, around-the-clock supervision would be a severe financial burden for the school district. So how I liken this to what I do is leaving students unsupervised in the lab. You just don't do it. And to make sure that there's no unauthorized access after hours, the lab is locked at all times, unless we are physically in there. The next case is Barnett versus Caldwell. And in this particular case, Phyllis Caldwell was the teacher and left her class unattended. 2 students were horsing around, resulted in a lacerated blood vessel caused by a dislocated clavicle. The student ended up dying. So even though the school's handbook says that supervision is required at all times, Georgia law says that supervision is a discretionary act. So it was up to the teacher's discretion, which I don't really get how, if it's in the handbook, how it can be not black and white. But that's the lab part of me coming out. So the parents sued, citing negligent supervision. But the courts in Georgia found that the teacher acted without malice and was therefore found not liable. Again, this to me is the same as leaving the lab unattended. I wouldn't do that. But our signature pages, even though we deal with older students, do actually talk about horseplay and goofing around and stuff in the lab. And the students are required to read the entire handbook and sign off that they have read this. So I think the act of having them read all of the policies and sign off would cover us in a situation such as this. In Munn versus Hotchkiss School, a student was on a school trip and ended up getting tick-borne encephalitis, which gave neurological damage and permanent permanent inability to speak. The federal court said that the school was negligent, said that they did not inform the student completely of the risk of tick-borne, specifically the risk of tick-borne illness, specifically the risk of encountering ticks on this hike, and also did not promote the use of insect spray and did not check the student for ticks after they returned from the hike. Okay, so they found the school district negligent. 10 mil in economic damages, 31.5 in non-economic. So the school district appealed, and it did not affirm or reverse. It just questioned the decision. And it questioned both parts. Were the damages excessive, and what exactly is the duty element of the negligence tort? So what I think about this is, in the lab, we have a CYB policy, cover your butt policy. Pretty much anything that can happen will happen, and you need to state that. And we do this by using language like including but not limited to, and again, I'll bring back up the student release. Dangers which may include but are not limited to being exposed to patients who may have HIV, herpes, hepatitis, or other infectious diseases, which would cover tick-borne diseases or anything. And the third paragraph goes on that says they will hold Seward County Community College harmless in the medical and all of its, not assessors and assigns, but all of its faculty. So anyway, this student release form must be completed before anything is done. So that would, again, take us out of this particular situation. Being from a medical field, though, we would have checked the student for ticks, and we would have covered all our bases. So there was perhaps a little bit of negligence there, but I don't believe $41.5 million worth of negligence. And the final one, I couldn't find the name of the case, but it was the Court of Special Appeals in Maryland. Basically, a student went in to draw a little boy, and she poked herself with the needle prior to sticking the boy. Instead of getting a new needle like you're supposed to, she went ahead and stuck the boy. So she denied this, but upon investigation, it found out that she had lied, and they started needle stick protocol. She was positive for Hep C, and the case was settled for $50,000, and the good news was the child was still negative for Hep C after 1 year. But to avoid this, in my case, you always have to inform the patient that you're a student, and they have the right to refuse. Second, students must always be supervised during clinicals. This student should not have been unsupervised. We have documentation of their bloodborne pathogens training and their phlebotomy training, meaning that someone in this program would never have stuck with a needle that had pierced anything prior to the other student. And also, professional ethics falls in here. I do teach that, and the fact that the student lied and then ended up confessing, that is something that we cover in professional ethics. So that's how I would deal with this stuff in my school.